Good evening. Thank you for joining us for the State Senate Candidate Forum for Rutland County. My name is Rich Clark. I'm a professor of political science at Vermont State University at Castleton. I'll be serving as the moderator this evening. This is organized and sponsored by PEGTV and Rutland Herald. As moderator, I will be asking the questions of the candidates for the next 90 minutes. The questions were composed by the Rutland Herald and myself. The candidates will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. I will only interrupt if a candidate has exceeded his or her time, so please be respectful of time and of each other. We have randomly ordered the position of the candidates, and we will rotate who answers first for each question. Then we will proceed in the order in which the candidates are positioned. A reminder, this is a forum, not a debate. This means the candidates will answer only the questions posed by the moderator and will not directly address one another. Before I introduce the candidates, I want to express, on behalf of my fellow citizens, my immense gratitude to all of you for putting yourselves out there to serve your community as elected representatives. Our candidates are Marcia Castle, Dana Peterson, David Weeks, Terry Williams, Robert Richards, and Brian Callamore. And our first question this evening, to start us off, tell us about yourself. I'm sorry, for Ms. Castle. Tell us about yourself and what you'd like to accomplish while representing Rutland in the Vermont State Senate.
Well, I've not held elected office, and I'm not a third or fourth generation Vermonter, but I have been a leader, and I have chosen Vermont as my home. I've been a teacher for just shy of 25 years, and I've been wrestling with a lot of the same issues that we are wrestling with as voters and as governors. With students, we've talked about how to live sustainably, how to deal with human migration, how to deal with the progress and pitfalls of AI, education, infectious diseases even before the pandemic hit, equity, diversity, inclusion, which we need to walk and embody if we are going to attract new people to come to Vermont, and how to restore civil dialogue in our government. I don't think that we are as susceptible to it in Vermont, but I have been energized to serve because I'm also, in addition to being a teacher, I'm a mediator, and I can sit with a diverse population, different perspectives. I can deal with issues with curiosity and compassion and rigor and respect, and I'm very intrigued by different perspectives. I think that diverse ideas are the basis of democracy, and I look forward to representing this district.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson, same question.
My name is Dana Peterson, and I am a retired educator. I spent 37 years in both teaching as well as in public school administration. And I serve on the Rutland Town Planning Commission and work with the Select Board. I also have not sought public offers other than Justice of the Peace one time. What I would like to focus on is something that I think everybody should identify with, and that is health, safety, and happiness. And I don't mean that glibly. I think that we all want to have an opportunity to have a fulfilling life, and that we don't need to worry about where meals are going to come from, where our housing is going to come from. And I'd like to focus on equity. I'd like to focus on support for the vulnerable. I'd like to focus on housing, which is a major concern statewide, but particularly in Rutland County. I'd like to focus on some economic development, and I'd also like to focus on education. And I'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here this evening and to discuss important issues for us in Rutland County. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Weeks.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich. PEGTV, Rutland Herald, for this valuable community forum. I'm Senator David Weeks, serving Rutland County. Brief intro, I'm from Wallingford, now Proctor. I'm a graduate of Mill River, UVM. I have 3 masters, and I'm 2 years into a PhD. I have 31 years of national service, starting as an enlisted Marine, then as a Navy officer, retired as a captain with 2 tours into Iraq. The last 10 years, I've been an aerospace program director, specializing in leading some of our highest technology projects exceeding $3 billion. I was first elected in 2022. In my first term, I served in the following committees. Full-time committee, I'm the vice chair of Senate Health and Welfare, and I serve on the Senate Education Committee. I'm also part of 5 part-time committees. The second part of the question was, what do I intend to accomplish during my upcoming tenure? And I have a record in the legislature. I drafted 3 bills in this last session. I sponsored 54 bills. I voted with 154 roll calls. My proposed legislation encompasses transportation, which I call economic corridors, election reform, welfare entitlement, residency rules, and property tax reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Williams, same question.
Good evening. I'm Terry Williams from Pulteney. I'm sitting senator on my freshman senator, and I have brought to the State House, I think, collaboration and dialogue and civil discourse, one of the things that seems to be lacking in our society nowadays. I'm on the Education and the Health and Welfare Committee, and my primary focus in the off-season has been with the homeless situation in Rutland County. I've been working with groups like Turning Point. I've been involved in 3 different housing, ad hoc housing groups, trying to help resolve the homeless situation. And I want to continue to work in that arena. I think that because the people are here and they have a need, and they're our constituents, that's what we all should do. One of my goals in the next biennium will be to reduce the tax burden on Vermonters. We need to make Vermont more affordable. We need to give tax breaks to the people that are on fixed incomes, primarily the veterans and the senior citizens that are living on Social Security, and I think we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Richards.
Hi, I'm Bob Richards. I'm from Fairhaven. I've lived there most of my life with brief stints at college and in the Navy. I was enlisted in the Navy. I didn't get to be an officer, but I enjoyed my time in the service. I was happy to do it. I'm married, and I have 3 children, 3 adult children who are all productive sons. I'm pretty proud of all of them. I have elected office, local office. I've been a selectman since 1991, a couple of times off the board, but effectively 25 plus years as a selectman, most of them as chairman. One of the things that I think I can do as a selectman for that length of time is I can take that experience to the State House and use it and allow everybody to understand what happens when a bill or a law or a rule becomes law, and how it's going to immediately affect the people back home. I'm sure it's the same effect that we get in Fairhaven that everybody gets in Rutland County. I plan to work for affordability in all of its forms, whether it's property tax reform or tax reform in general, or how we house people, it has to be affordable. We have to be able to do it. We have to be able to, as a state, afford it.
Thank you. Senator Calamar.
Thanks, Rich. And good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Collmore, and I'm seeking my 6th term as Rutland County Senator, completing my 10th year this year. Initially, I was on the Senate Health and Welfare Committee in the morning and Government Operations in the afternoon. Last 8 years, I moved the morning committee to Senate Agriculture, where I have been the vice chair for the last 8 years, and I moved last biennium to the Institutions Committee in the afternoon. I'm a 1972 graduate of Middlebury College. Governor Douglas was in my class and remains a close friend at this point. I think 2 of the candidates have already mentioned affordability as a key issue, and I couldn't agree more. And I want to go on record as being in full alignment with the governor's 3 recommendations, if you will, to grow the economy, thereby allowing us to make Vermont more affordable while still protecting our most vulnerable. I think it's interesting to note that the budget over the last 4 years, fiscal year 2020, was $6.2 billion. This year, it moved up to $8.5 billion. That's a 30% increase. And senior citizens, we're the 2nd oldest state in the country, simply can't put up with more tax increases. They're on fixed incomes, and I think that's an important consideration.
Great. Thank you. We're going to start this next question with Mr. Peterson. One of the challenges Vermonters face is finding affordable housing. What do you think Montpelier can do to help those who either cannot find affordable housing or are struggling to afford the housing they currently have?
First of all, thank you for the question. I would take this from both a policy and a procedure standpoint. Montpelier can help set the structure by which the affordability can be made accessible. In other words, set the budget in a way that would provide allocations or relief from taxes, particularly as others have said, Social Security, making sure that people who are older have that affordability. The other thing is setting up a structure for younger people to be able to come to the state and to be able to establish families. There's a gap within families. As soon as students hit about 20 years of age, they disappear for a period of time unless they're coming in from out of state. We need to make sure that people can stay here, but it has to be affordable. So Montpelier can set the structure, a broad structure that would then have allocations to be provided and then turned over to one of the agencies to implement. And Agency of Human Services or someone else, so that the money that is expended can be provided to those who are most in need, and they would have flexible ability to access housing. We also need to invest in the housing stock because it is desperately underdeveloped, and we could do more by redeveloping old housing stock and introducing new. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Weeks?
Thank you. So first, the solution to housing is within the commercial sector. State-funded nonprofits are doing a great job, but our state treasury simply cannot afford this expense. There are too many demands on the treasury. I'm sure that you've all heard the numbers, that currently there are 2,200 units offline in Rutland County. 220 of these units are in downtown Rutland alone. So number one, we need to look at why the commercial market has stalled in building housing. Currently, nonprofits' single unit costs are $450,000 per unit for new construction. We need to concentrate on rehabilitating those offline units with the VHIP program. And the VHIP program, in summary, is roughly $40,000 per unit, which is spent to return the unit to the market. Compare this to $450,000 for new construction. You can see that this is 1/10 of the cost and is a very simple and accessible remedy. Number two, we need to coordinate the housing effort within Rutland. In Rutland alone, we have 25 different agencies involved in housing and the homeless challenge, and this needs to be streamlined. Third and final, my proposal is that property taxes should be capped at the time of sale, based on the sale price and a maximum of 3% increase annually. This mirrors California's Act 13, and it worked. It's been working for 40 years, and this can protect our elderly and work here. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Williams.
Thank
your
you, Rick.
question.
So your legislature has done a lot already as far as making more regulations so that we can build in a historic downtown. As long as you have water and sewer, you can take a single family house and you can make it a quadruplex. Unfortunately, one of the things we can't do because of the regulatory requirements is we need to alleviate the regulations that allow development to come in. State's not going to do it. It's going to have to take outside entrepreneurs and investors to build housing that meets the needs of Vermont. I think one of the things that I'd like to see happen is that the state, just for example, the immediate need for homeless people, we could take some of the buildings that the state leases or owns that are currently being heated but they're not being used, we can turn that into homeless housing. The other thing we can do is we can do an inventory of single-family housing that has 8 or 10 rooms and they only have one person, and offer them some affordable housing options so they don't have to keep heating a duplex house. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Richards.
I like the idea of rehabbing old houses. We have to understand that there's a lot of hidden costs in that, and new housing, you just build and it's there. But there's a lot of inventory out here in Rutland County that could be rehabbed and used. That would help low income primarily. Secondly, I think it's important to not be afraid to allow developers to make some money. And if that means subsidizing some of their efforts to get the inventory back up to where it needs, then we should do that. I think VHIP is probably a place to start that. And use the monies to help people in the middle income area as well, because sometimes you're just on the edge of being able to be eligible for a program, and maybe you make slightly too much money. That's we should be very careful about that. For instance, there was a thing in the paper the other day about property taxes, and that 47,000 was the bottom cliff for that, and 47,000 is not a lot of money nowadays, and so we need to redo those thresholds and try to help people in the middle.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Colomer.
Thank you. So back in 2022, the legislature passed what's known as the HOME Act. It will be fully implemented in this coming December and will help expand housing availability and affordability. It's going to be the new rules, a key ingredient for meeting Vermont's dire need for updated and increasing housing. I actually said earlier that Vermont is the second oldest state in the country. We're tied with Florida now at 20.6%. Maine is the oldest state in the country. So rental housing prices can be very high, especially in locations like in the ski communities where young workers are really desperately needed. And by changing outdated state and local zoning codes to be more aligned with 21st century realities, this legislation, which again will be fully implemented in December, acknowledges that Vermont's longstanding zoning regulations, land use policies, and lengthy permitting processes have not been meeting the needs of residents. Senator Weeks mentioned the 25 housing groups that currently exist. I'm a big believer in that, but I think we need to have one boss, if you will, to sort of help all 25 of those agencies get together and come up with some great plans. But I do think we need further regulatory reform in Act 250, and I hope that'll be on the table when the legislature reconvenes in January.
Thank you. And Ms. Cassell.
Thank you. I imagine several different levels of housing. I think we need emergency housing, and I agree with Senator Williams about that, the responsibility that we have to these people. Since the legislature is out of session, it might require a little executive action on the part of the governor at this point. We also need to continue to support and allocate the VHIP improvement program, because that can rehabilitate. It can allow people to stay in place, age in place, stay in their homes, rehabilitate the inventory that we have so that people can move in. We need transitional housing for maybe the elder folks. I've been doing door knocking and realizing that people are in cumbersome situations, that they really don't have a place to go to, and they're in homes that they really can't take care of or afford. We also need some supportive housing for folks who are still suffering from addictive disorders and substance, mental health. And this is a case where it is not all just a government problem. It is a public-private collaboration that we need. We need affordable housing to attract and retain the people that we want to invite and welcome to Vermont as well. And first home owners. I'm intrigued by what Senator Weeks had said about the capping practice in California. I'm not aware of that, but I'd love to know more about it.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Senator Weeks. I think we can all agree that the level of partisan polarization has increased across the United States over the past 3 decades, while Vermont has been able to maintain a more civil tone in its politics. How do you explain what sets us apart, and how will you work to maintain civil discourse in state government?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I think so on the campaign trail, about half the questions have to do with national politics. So what we've been very successful at doing is simply separating national politics from state politics. We have enough problems here in Vermont and in our local community that we can separate the two. Now, I'll also say that sometimes political party gets in the way. Personally, I feel that every legislator, every prospective legislator, really wants to focus on the betterment of the community. And I feel that intrinsically. Unfortunately, the politics gets in the way. So once legislators get to Montpelier, it becomes, in most cases, party votes, which are not to the benefit of the general public. I simply think that we keep our politics at the local level, at the state level. We focus on our own problems, and we recognize the professionalism of the legislators and the staffs that surround us, and we benefit from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Williams?
So 2 years ago, when I was a brand-new freshman senator, the Snelling Institute put on a kind of a warming get-together. This is how the legislature is supposed to work. And we went out, we talked to, regardless of party, we didn't really know each other. We didn't know what their party was. But I think the biggest problem in Vermont is party. We had 60 freshman legislators, which was probably one of the largest classes we had. And when you talk to people, a lot of them were like-minded. And it's amazing to me, we came back, I was in December, we came back in January. And as we started doing our thing in both chambers, we came back, the whole narrative, the whole tone had changed. A lot of it had to do with the party. I think we should all, when we're running for office, we should all run as one and just do away with the party and let people select the best candidate. Everybody tries to get me involved in, what's going on at the national level, what president I'm going to vote for. I can't control anything above Montpelier. And I can't actually control anything that's going on in Montpelier either, but I'm going to try. So I think that we all need to get back to the civil discourse. We need to reach across the aisle and find out how we agree and not how we disagree.
Thank you. Mr. Richards?
A former town moderator at our town meeting every year used to used to give us a lesson about civil discourse. And I think if you just see the look around here, it's here. And it has to be that way. We respectfully disagree on certain ways to get Vermont to a point that we're all happy with, and we can respectfully disagree. It's not a problem. It's okay. There are many ways to do it, and someplace generally in the middle is the answer. In the past, I've worked for people. Well, I've worked for Bernie Sanders, and then a fellow that was at our regular select board meeting thought I was the most conservative person on the board. So there's times to be conservative and there's times to be liberal, and the twain should meet, and they should meet often. And as you can see in this discussion tonight, it's happening and it can happen.
Thank you. Senator Calamar?
Thanks, Rich. So I think if we go back and look at individual bills, I'm going to just guess that 85% of the time, both parties, I guess there's three really, with Progressive Party also represented in Montpelier, we vote the same way. It's only the 15% of the other ones who, stand out as ones where we have disagreement. And as Bob mentioned, we all, I think, share similar goals. It's just the way that we get to the desired result that is different. But I've served under Democratic chairs and Republican chairs and been in committees with the majority party more represented than mine. But in the end, I think we do have the ability, at least in Montpelier, to get along. And as was mentioned earlier, we do respectfully disagree with the procedure at times, but I think it's less so than certainly in Washington. And I think there are people there that you can, one thing that I've tried to do, every now and then, you just stand up and go to the cafeteria and sit down with somebody you don't know. And again, with the numbers being the way they are, generally that's a member of the other party. And you sit down and you have a good time just talking about their life and what they are going through themselves and that kind of thing. And I think if more people did that more often, it would be great.
Thank you. All right. Ms. Castle.
This is the lane that I ride in. Everything that I have ever done was about trying to understand and be understood. This is why I went into languages. This is why I have worked in global education. This is why I've become a mediator. I am comfortable with sitting with conflict. I am a consensus seeker. I am a bridge builder. I can persist and endure, and I have the disposition to sit with disagreements because they often reveal weaknesses, and you can come to a stronger, more enduring solution if you incorporate the information that somebody else has from their piece of the picture. I don't have all the answers. I only have a piece of the narrative, and I need to know what other people see, what my blind spots are. I love this work. I am intrigued with why people believe what they believe. What are the anchoring experiences that they had in their life that help them believe that? And I can listen with curiosity. I am not a fighter. When people say, will you fight for our rights? And I'm like, I will research, I will communicate, I will dialogue, I will advocate, I will converse, but I'm not going to fight or demean. It just isn't in my nature. This is how I would represent. This is how I would work.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. The question of partisan polarization, as others have mentioned, I think that there's a civil tone in Vermont because here we all work together to accomplish common goals. And we do that without labels. One of the things that was most impressive to me was back in 2011 when we had Tropical Storm Irene come through, and we had infrastructure devastation, and we had people and homes and families all separated. And what I noticed was that people came together, worked together in community to help one another. And that's what I believe is truly unique about Vermont. We don't look at labels, we look at people, and we ask ourselves, how can we contribute to a community project or success story? The efforts to improve outcomes for all members of the community are things that are noble in all of our communities. Supporting good ideas and working together, critical. And finally, leading by example. Focus on what we have in common rather than what separates us. Others have said that at this table. And we can use points of disagreement as an opportunity to refine collaboration. Collect those ideas, listen, and find those common points so that we can all be successful and work together.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with Senator Williams for the next question. The opioid crisis is no longer a front-page story it once was, but still too many Vermont families are touched by addiction in their families and in our communities. Is the legislature doing enough to address this problem? If so, what is working? And if not, what should be done?
Thanks for the question, Rich. Actually, I think that the state overall is not doing enough. And I think it's, number one, we have to stop the flow of the substance coming in that is affecting our loved ones. You know, people in Chittenden County think that having an opioid protection center, it's a overdose protection center, is going to make a difference. It isn't really that I can see, and it gives us a liability in the state of Vermont. I think what we need to do is we have to stop the flow of the drug, number one. We also need to, we're working quite well. Turning Point is an example. I've used them before, that they're working, they're counseling, but nobody can fix the problem for the addict except the addict himself. You can provide him with resources to do that, but unless he or she accepts what you're trying to give them, it's got to be them that has to make the difference. And the other thing that I really think we should do is we need a halfway house. If somebody goes into emergency room because they have a opioid problem or a fentanyl problem, once they get in there, until we have a place for them to go, we can't fix the problem. And I know that I've had one family tell me that when their individual came out, they hit 15 times they got pinged by a drug dealer because they knew where they were going. So we need to fix that.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Richards.
Education, first and foremost. We need to get to our kids early and often. We need to also give them something different to do than that. We also need to, in terms of poverty, people go to drugs because they have no hope. And so we need to fix what is making them hopeless. And that is their inability to have a house, their inability to be able to feed themselves or their family. They may have mental problems that are making them depressed, and they go to drugs. We need to help them stay away from that. I think it's impossible to think that we will be able to interdict enough of the opium and opioids and fentanyl to make a difference. I think we need to make people not want those drugs.
Thank you. Senator Colomar?
Thank you. I certainly think we've spent money, maybe not enough, but we've spent a lot of money trying to correct the problem. We have an opioid settlement fund, which comes to us from the federal government, which has been used in the past year to try to find a solution to this problem. I think it's evidenced mostly when you look at the homeless population. Many of them are suffering from mental health issues and substance abuse issues, and I would be in favor of, as quickly as we can, developing transitional living for them with the mandate that those wraparound services have to be available for that population and that they have to take advantage of those wraparound services. So I think we've done a lot, but there is much more to do. And unfortunately, sometimes the problem is not open enough for people to kind of realize what's going on. Senator Williams mentioned Turning Point. I'll mention Dismas House as well, where it becomes a little bit more open and when people can get together that are suffering with the same affliction and find their own solution for it. So I guess, Rich, in answer to your question, we've done a lot, but there's lots more that we still can do.
Thank you.
I would agree with a lot of the things that I've heard already. I think that you certainly need to stem the flow of substance, but it's about belonging as much as anything else. And as Mr. Richards was saying, both the education ahead of time and in the treatment, giving folks a different reason to not want to do this. If you are on the streets, if you are poor, recreation and escape is certainly a way to turn. But in the communities, I'm not sure that we can legislate this. We can support the agencies that are doing the good work, the humanity work with people, to accept them, to break down the stigma, to see how close you are to that person, how thin the sliver is between the two of you, and to reach out and to accept them. Wraparound care is important. I saw this when we were welcoming refugees in, that you can build capacity if you just wrap around a family, wrap around an individual, and you take care of all of their needs, and you don't compartmentalize or silo things out because things slip through. But I think it's really a sense of acceptance, belonging that will help them turn away.
Good, thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you. As others have said, this Montpelier and the state as a whole have been engaged in efforts to stem the tide of addiction. There has certainly been money, as Senator Collmore has mentioned, through the settlement that has been used to support programs to combat the issues of opioid addiction. It's critical to break the cycles. And as others have said, it requires education. It also requires alternatives. We need to think about the 3 steps necessary to break any cycle, and that's prevention, that's intervention, and it's postvention. And what that means is we have to take an approach that is similar to what AA uses. There's a wraparound. To have a community that is going to support people who are working towards giving up addiction, and it's not easy. Senator Collmore mentioned something about housing. Yes, transitional housing, supportive housing is key, because if you can create a community where people are working together for a common purpose, and that is to overcome addiction, then you will be better placed for success. Thank you.
Senator
Okay.
Weeks.
Thank you, Rich. So as the Vice Chair of Senate Health and Welfare Committee with my colleague Jerry Williams, we spend half of our time deep diving this topic. I support, and I'll be very emphatic, I support the recovery community. It's been mentioned by Senator Collmore, the Dismas House, Turning Point, great examples. And I'd add to that Jenna's Promise, phenomenal facility for the recovery community. And I'll tell you what I don't support. I don't support the injection sites. So we narrowly avoided having a site, an injection site, in downtown Rutland about 4 or 5 months ago. So I'll give you a scenario. Fentanyl, 50 times stronger than heroin. Somebody shoots up and they go out into the street, and God knows what happens next. They get in their car, they confront citizens. That's not the solution. And the recovery community agreed that that was not the solution. I do agree with Senator Collmore that transitional housing with reintegration services is part of the solution. But I do want to also reflect on the issue that we're taking care of a symptom. The symptom is drug abuse. The problem is the economy. Rutland is 80 years with a stagnant economy, a railroad-based community, never made the transition into the modern automobile, and we need to address the transition into a modern 21st century economy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The next question, we're going to start with Mr. Richards. Homelessness is clearly a national problem that we're feeling all across Vermont, including in Rutland County. What do you think state government can do to address this problem, and what would you change about the current policies to alleviate homelessness?
One of the things that we do, and this isn't just in Vermont, but it certainly is, Vermont is part of that, is we try to solve problems at the top, the most expensive piece of any problem, homelessness being one. So we admit that we have homeless people all of a sudden, and we put them in motels. It's the most expensive solution that isn't a solution that we have. I think that we need to start at, once again, as I said in the last answer, we need to start at the bottom of the problem and admit that there's a problem, that people can't afford to be in houses now. It's so expensive to go in a house. If you lose a house for any reason, whether it becomes an Airbnb, if you lose an apartment because it becomes an Airbnb or anything, all of a sudden you're faced, if you're a working class person in Rutland County, all of a sudden you're faced at looking at $4,000 or $5,000 startup to get into a house. It's not possible for a lot of people, and not a lot of people make that kind of money where they have that kind of savings. So we have to start at the bottom. We have to understand that we need to educate folks again, once again with education, once again with getting the economy going, so there are jobs for people that are good jobs that will pay for them to be in an apartment.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
oh, sorry.
That's all right.
9 seconds left.
No.
Oh, I'm over.
Senator Collimer.
Thank you, Rich. The three senators recently have attended at least a couple of meetings on this topic. Chris Loris and Megan Novak have been hired to take a very deep dive into this. Unfortunately, their report probably won't be released until 2026. So we have to deal with it in the interim. But there were some interesting statistics that came out of that. Pre-COVID, on an average year, we had about 50 households in Rutland County that needed our assistance. And there will always be those who need our assistance. Single moms, folks with disabilities, especially veterans, and we need to take care of them. I don't have any issue with that. But when COVID hit, things went the other way very quickly. We were able to get federal funding to do a lot of the work with this. The hotel motel voucher program, I think quite clearly, is not working very well, and it needs to get done at some point. We're in an 80-day period now where people will lose their room at some point. But we got more from out of the area than Rutland, so we're dealing with folks who are still Vermonters, but were moved here from out of other towns and cities in the country or in the state. So that is not working, and I'll still go back to my transitional piece. I think it should be at the state's expense, by the way, to do that, and we need to start gearing up to help people find housing.
Thank you. Ms. Castle?
So I agree that we have to house these people. We can't just ignore it. I think, as Senator Collimore is saying, that if we look at it as a statewide issue rather than a district issue, we might be able to make it more equitable. We did take on more people than geographically we were set up for. I think sometimes we don't treat this in the same way that we treat other people who become unhoused, such as for natural disasters. We're sympathetic of those people and we rush to it, but somehow we are blaming this population for the situation that they're in. And I'm not sure that that is fair, and it is a little more stigmatized. And I think that we need to treat these folks in the same way or closer to the way we treat people who have been flooded. in many cases, they are homeless because of situations that were not entirely within their control. And it was a very fragile time during COVID, and we are still recovering from that, whether it's through education gaps or homelessness or our drug afflictions. That it's not over yet. And so I think that just as a community, we need to look with a little more empathy. I know I would not be able to manage out on the street.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you again. It's a big question, and it's a complex topic. I think that it's important to take it down to a variety of steps. I would identify 4. One, we need to have a plan for emergency housing when that comes up. We also need to have a plan for transitional housing. Once an emergency has been alleviated, then people can move on to transitional housing. We need to have supportive housing for the folks that are experiencing drug addiction or other dependencies. And that needs to have a community that is going to support them in positive choices. And then we need to have sustainable housing. So it's taking it at the very ground level and looking at that systemic approach. And that by doing that, we can then address the needs of each person wherever they are along the spectrum. $4,000 to $5,000 for putting down for a house, I think one of my colleagues said earlier, that is true also for renters. And so the same problem that we have with housing is a problem that we have in renting. And for people to come up with that kind of money for first month, last month, security deposit of $4,000 to $5,000 is in some cases impossible, and so people live homelessly. That needs to be addressed in some way, systematically. The funding may be available, but it's a question of access, and we need to do a better job at providing access to those funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Weeks?
Okay. Thank you, Rich. So first, let me agree with Senator Collmore. There always has to be a safety net for our most disadvantaged. So disabled, elderly, pregnant, folks with kids. I completely agree. We have in Vermont some of the most generous benefits to the homeless and the destitute in the nation. So naturally, folks migrate towards the path of least resistance and the best benefits. And this is what we're experiencing. But we're talking big money here. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And each extension of the homeless program here in Rutland, the motel program, is roughly $45 million per 6 or 7 month increments. And that's not sustainable. The 3 senators support Governor Scott. We've capped the expense. We have to. We don't have the Treasury to continue to expand the budget in that regard, on the backs of the second oldest population in the nation with a stagnant economy. I intend to introduce legislation, first off, that requires a residency requirement for these benefits. I think that's a good start. I don't know what the residency should be, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, but there needs to be some type of requirement so we take care of our own. Again, I think this is a symptom of the problem. The problem is the economy. The focus should be on rejuvenating our local and our state economy. I fully support the efforts of CEDAR and the Rutland Regional Planning Commission on this rejuvenation of our economy. Thank you.
And Senator Williams?
So we've been around Robin Hood's barn on this. I think that I've been involved with 3 different housing homeless groups. The Homeless Prevention Center meeting is probably the most valuable I've been to. And I think the last count that I was there were 14 different nonprofit organizations that were working. And the biggest question that came out of these meetings was, why are all these people coming to Rutland? Well, they're coming here because we're taking care of them, because you guys all do such a good job, and they do it on a shoestring, too. I went to the same meeting that Senator Collmore went to with Mr. Loris, and one of the things that I deducted from the people that were there was there's nobody in charge. We need to appoint somebody, some group, give them the authority and the responsibility to take all this effort and channel it. And maybe it's got to be somebody that's appointed by the governor. And then, because I got a call from a couple different committee chairs because they heard that I was involved with the groups down here, and they said, "Who's in charge?" I said, "Nobody. We're all working towards the same end goal, but we're working in 15 different directions. So we need to have some we need some direction, and we need one person to be responsible by name." Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to start this next question with Senator Collmore. How would you address recent attempts how would you assess, recent attempts to address the problem many young families face providing child care and all the consequences of that problem? And what else can be done by the legislature in addressing this issue?
We had, I think, two avenues to investigate when this came up, I think the biennium before last. One was a voluntary program that the administration offered, and the second one was a mandatory one, which includes a payroll tax, which in the end was adopted and passed. And now people who either work for someone or the employer have to pay into a mandatory child care system. It's in its very early stages at the moment, so I don't know how effective it's been, but there are millions and millions of dollars involved. And I think at this point, rather see how that develops before we do anything else. I think all too often the legislature passes a statute and doesn't take time 2 or 3 years later to go back and look at the results and see if there were any unintended consequences from what we did, and then tweak the bill and try to change it if we need to. So we do have child care bill in effect, and it's running, and I want to see what the results are.
Great, thank you so much. Ms. Castle.
I am glad that there was efforts made with the payroll tax. So frequently, this becomes a woman's problem and not a family's problem or a community problem, and that is an economic problem for women. I think that I would agree in terms of not rushing too much to tweak it, but I think that maybe we also have an access problem because many child care places closed during COVID, and we haven't seen the resurgence of that. It's possible that we would need to incentivize training and certification for people to go into this practice, such important and much needed practice. It may be that in terms of siting, we might be able to align it with some of the schools that are seeing reduced populations, because this would be a kindred practice that could be practiced in some of the shrinking schools. But I am very eager to understand the magnitude of this and to support whatever can be done to continue the progress in providing safe, affordable, and plentiful child care in the state of Vermont. This will also be something that we need to do in order to attract people to come here. So it's essential.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Yes, thanks again for that question. As others have said, this requires an investment in the most vulnerable. Our children, as well as our elderly, are on the spectrum where we need to take care of them. And a payroll tax is a great start, and we can certainly see how that plays out. But we can actually focus that. It's not too unlike healthcare. But the Finland, was in economic distress in the 1970s. They were the lowest performing economic country in all of Europe. They decided to invest in two things. They decided to, and they were basically one of the same. They decided to invest in education throughout your life, and they decided to invest particularly in childcare. So they made sure that the most vulnerable were cared for, and that as Marcia mentioned just moments ago, it often falls on women to take care of the children. They made sure that there were enough facilities for women to drop off and work part-time, thereby contributing to the economy and also being able to make sure that they had quality childcare for their children. And they scaled that up in terms of the number of hours that the children would be in childcare, and then in elementary school, and eventually going to high school. Investing in children will help alleviate some of the problems that we've talked about in the social ills that we already have discussed. Thank you.
Senator Weeks.
Thank you, Rich. So Senator Williams and I saw this unfold in the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. A huge effort in that committee to address this problem, which I believe we've largely solved, but we've gold-plated the problem. So I'll give you a typical legislative response. We overregulate the system. 2 to 4 years ago, we overregulated, businesses fail, and then we have a crisis. And how do you respond to a crisis? You start throwing money at it, okay? So now, last year, or maybe 18 months ago, we passed a bill where we spend $69 million per year via a payroll tax to supplement daycare or childcare. The goal, which we clearly saw in the committee, was the goal based on the RAND study was $691 million per year, which is 1/10 of the state budget for child care. This is very generous, and I'd say this is a little too generous. So this is based on, the final solution was 575% of federal poverty index level, which, to put this into terms, is a family of 4 earning $180,000 per year. That's too excessive. And so there are limits. Our Treasury can't support these types of programs, and nor can our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Williams?
So I want to flow right into what Senator Weeks just said, that, and we didn't adopt the actual RAND Corporation recommendation. We actually found somewhere in between, but, you know, a lot of people that are paying out of their payroll, they don't have kids. And, you know, we used to have adequate daycare in every small town. And what happens, the state got involved, they started increasing the requirements for people that ran a home daycare. Now they had to have an associate degree. And now they've got to have a bachelor's degree. And basically what they did is they regulated them right out of business, because people just couldn't take the time and still run their business. I'll give you an example. I had a constituent contact me. Actually, when this bill came out, I sent the bill to her because she ran a home health, daycare center. And I said, I want you to look at this bill and tell me if you see anything wrong with it. And it came back crickets. There was nothing wrong. Well, now she runs a home health care center. She's getting married, and because she's getting married and she's not going to be living in this facility, she has to make it a child care center, which is going to require her to take 2 fewer children, because the building has to go through a complete reevaluation and she has to apply for another process. So I think we need to look at the regulatory requirements, and we need to cut back on the government being involved in that.
Thank you. And Mr. Richards, same question.
My first son was born in 1982. Politicians promised daycare and child care at that point. They started to come to a conclusion in the last session. They finally got around to the idea. I think what they've done so far is good, but I think the next step in that process is making child care a profession, so that people can afford to be in that job. What happens most of the time is it's transitional at best for people who work in that position. Or in the case of our family, my wife eventually, she quit her job and started a daycare with our 3 boys, and she was able to have 2, maybe 3 other people in the 3 other kids in there. But it was cheaper for her to quit her job than to drive to Rutland every day, come home, take her paycheck, and hand it over to a daycare solution. So I like the term investment. It's an investment in the community. It's an investment in our economy to have good child care that people can trust and they can afford. When they do that, they get into the workforce and they help our workforce. We populate our workforce, which we need badly. So child care is a necessity, and to to say that there's some upper level limit is a little bit, to me, a little bit
Thank you.
unhealthy.
Thank you. We're about two-thirds through. We're going to turn to education. We'll start with Marcia Castle. Funding public education in Vermont has long been a challenge for our small rural state. How do you propose to fix education funding in the state?
Well, there's plenty of finger pointing to go around. We've talked to folks, the legislature is saying, curb your budgets. You send it to us, it's our job to find the money. School boards are saying to the General Assembly, don't send us unfunded mandates. School districts are told that they need to figure out the difference between needs and wants and really refine their budgets. Administrators probably need to match their discretionary funds with the so-called unfunded mandates to make sure that that is a match to get things done. I wish that the governor would not scapegoat teachers. That is not the problem. Yes, there are some numerical problems in smaller schools where we're going to have to make hard decisions about consolidations and maybe some hub schools, keeping the elementary schools in the local community, but maybe having some larger collaborations between union areas. But teachers themselves and their salaries are not the problem. There is also the entire healthcare issue that's embedded in funding. There's some things that I've come to understand that are in the education funding that don't have anything to do with it and maybe could be taken out, such as...
You're going to have to
Okay.
stop you there. Thank you. Mr. Peters?
Thank you, Rich. As Marcia just mentioned, it's a complex issue. But having served as both a building level principal and a tech center director and superintendent, I have seen how the complexities play out. I think we need to do something to simplify, but simplifying is also means taking those things which are not really educationally related out, whether it's building improvements or mitigation for PCBs, or whether it's mental health that is actually affecting families outside of school, but they carry them into school, or whether it is something else, an unfunded mandate, as Marcia mentioned. We need to decouple education from those non-educational expenses. That will also help us to alleviate some of the property taxes, and we can look at other ways of funding it. The lottery already funds the education fund. So there are many things that we need to do, but we have to stop cobbling things together on a subsystem that is really not working to the benefit of our taxpayers, our students, our teachers, or others. And the fact of the matter is that you have to invest in the quality personnel to be able to run effective schools. And so we need to focus education like the Finns did and make that a priority and pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Weeks?
Thank you, Rich. So my other committee is Senate Education with Senator Williams. We spend all day together. We go from health and welfare to education and back and forth. And half the time in the Senate Education Committee, we take testimony on education funding and academic excellence. I can tell you that we cannot suffer another year of 13.8% increases in property taxes, which then go directly into education. Unfortunately, 2025 will be exactly what we experienced in 2024. We've fixed nothing, and so we'll see this again in 2025. The property tax formula doesn't recognize that we have the second oldest population in the nation who are on fixed incomes, and they cannot suffer those kinds of radical movements in the property taxes. So currently there's a Future of Vermont's Education System Commission. This is the 37th study on funding for Vermont education. And I'm not sure that they're going to come up with a different solution, but I do think we need to evaluate the difference between a property tax base versus an income tax base to fund education. We currently have the highest cost per student in the U.S. with test results in the middle of the pack and declining. So we need to focus on where we have the greatest expense compared to other states. So we need to cut back on admin to student ratios and staff to student ratios, which are the highest in the nation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Senator Williams?
So I'm on the education committee, and I've seen it 2 years. We sit there and we just keep kicking the can down the road every year. I'm going to be cautious with this because I've got friends and relatives that are all teachers. Nobody's blaming the teachers. You know, we've had teachers that actually testified in our committee that said, you know, why do we have to we're doing bus duty. If a student's parents don't pick them up, we have to stay. Where's the union? The union needs to be doing more for the teachers. Teachers are, the salaries, I think, are adequate, but they're not on standard, they're not on the same level as other states. We can't get people to come to the state of Vermont because they get here and they can't find a place to stay. If they do, they can't afford to live here, even to rent a place on what we pay them. So the biggest thing I can see right now is we need to come up with a different way to fund education. The Brigham decision said, yes, you have to fund education. Vermont's one of the only states, I think the only state, that it's a constitutional requirement, but you don't have to do it with property tax. And it's going to take a paradigm shift to restructure the entire tax system in the state of Vermont. I've got a plan for it. I actually went to propose it, and I got talked into doing another study, and then we found out there's been 37 different studies. We need to fix the problem.
Thank you. Mr. Richards?
Specifically, let's start with trying to use income tax to fund part of this education system. I think that's a start. I know it won't solve the entire problem, but it'll take some of the and more people will be paying. Let's take mental health and those services out of the property tax system, put them with health and human services where they belong. Once again, it's off the property tax. It's in the regular general fund where people who there will be more people paying for it. It's not like we're getting rid of the cost. We're just putting it to where more people will pay for it. One thing I found out just recently, which just boggles my mind, is the education system pays for current use. In current use, it's beyond belief that we're asking the education system to take that on by themselves. Current use was made so that we'd keep Vermont looking like Vermont, and that meant giving farmers a break and giving people who farm or log or do whatever they do with their property to keep it open. That doesn't have a lot to do with schools, and so maybe those three things to start with would help.
Great, thank you. And Senator Colomar?
Thank you, Rich. So I think everything should be on the table, and as we went around the table here, folks have mentioned different things. Should we have a property tax situation or an income-based tax? I think we should reduce administrative costs. I don't think that is out of the question. I think Marcia mentioned consolidation, and I know because I've lived in towns where if you mention consolidating with another high school, you're in big trouble. And so my model might be at the elementary school level, you have a community-based school that still operates the way it does now, but we would have regional high schools, and that could save some money, I believe. Let's be honest, we have a system. About 20 or 25 years ago, we had 100,000 students in our K through 12 system. This year, we'll get maybe to about 80,000. So we've lost 20,000 kids. So we have fewer kids, but it costs more money to educate them every year. And the test results, according to an article in, I think this was 7 days, the Vermont Comprehensive Assessment Program, or VCAP, Preliminary data shows student performance on standardized tests in reading, math, and science mostly remain flat or slightly below the year before. So we're about in the middle of the pack, and we're not getting the result that I think all of us want to get. So to me, everything's on the table.
Great, thank you. All right. Change subjects again here, and we may or may not all agree that climate change is a global problem requiring global solutions. Still, what do you think is the most impactful way for Vermonters and Vermont state government to address the environmental problems that we face? And we'll start with Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Rich. I think it's important to realize that we have to address the environmental impact of a changing climate. We also have to address the needs of our citizens as we're moving through that transition. And I think it's important to focus on designing an affordable transition away from various fossil fuels. It's not to necessarily say that we have to eliminate it next year, but we have to make progress towards saving on energy use. And that can come in many different forms. I don't know if people remember the 72 embargo, the oil embargo, and people were talking about peak oil and ending the dependence on oil. My clock is not working. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted. I think it's important for us to make conscious decisions that will be both environmentally friendly, economically friendly, wallet friendly, and climate friendly. And to do that, we have some resources that are being allocated. We can help people make the transition to electric vehicles away from internal combustion engines. Those dollars are well spent, I think. When we help people who are particularly on the margin, those who are at the lowest end of the economic spectrum, those who are low and very low and even moderate income folks, they often buy vehicles that are polluting. And they are a money suck, and they end up taking up a lot more of their money to be able to maintain. Let's use those monies appropriately. They've already been appropriated. Let's help those people access reliable transportation, like weatherization. We can also take the monies that are going into weatherization. That is a great initiative. 5 caps across the state work with the legislature to implement weatherizations to aging housing stock. That will help with the housing problem. We need to use the monies that we currently have and help to reduce our energy, our dependence on energy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Senator
Okay,
Weeks.
thank you, Rich. So my colleagues, Senator Collmore and Senator Williams, and the governor agree that we have a global hydrocarbon problem. We need to address this, but we need to address it at a pace that doesn't make Vermont more unaffordable. We supported the Governor Scott's veto, which was overridden by the other party. The clean heat standard is nothing other than a carbon tax, somewhere between 70 cents and $4 per gallon, funding a $16 billion program. Senator Bray, who is the architect of the clean heat standard, acknowledges that the cost is at least $2 per gallon, with $40 million per year just to administer the program in Vermont. Remember that our state budget is only $8.6 billion. So we need a measured pace. We cannot, again, you heard this 2 or 3 times in this tonight, we can't put this type of burden on the backs of the second oldest population in the nation and a stagnant economy. I caution Vermont about self-congratulating themselves on their level of renewable energy. This is only because we buy our energy from Hydro-Quebec. This purchase arrangement can change at any time. We don't need to punish the 70% of Vermonters that use fossil fuels for heating and transportation. The answer is to study and incentivize the reintroduction of nuclear power into Vermont and become an energy exporter to make this transition away from fossil fuels.
Thank you. Senator Williams?
Can you repeat the question?
I would love to, yes. What do you think is the most impactful way for Vermonters and Vermont state government to address the environmental problems that we face?
Okay, so back in the 70s, I can remember that, the oil embargo, but I also remember when we were talking about a mini ice age. You know, I'm not a climate crisis denier, but I believe that the Earth goes through different cycles. And until we figure out, you know, where we're actually going to go climate-wise, I think one of the things we need to do, and we've been doing in Vermont, is we need to make Vermont more resilient to the types of flooding, inundation flooding that we had all through Vermont. There's nobody in particular that's responsible for that. One of the things that I know when I was on the Rutland Regional Planning Commission we did, and I was also the emergency management coordinator in the town of Poultney, we upgraded our back roads so that the culverts, the cross drains that we actually had met FEMA standards. FEMA gave us requirements. The state of Vermont took it as very seriously, and we changed it. We used stone bedding in our ditches on the side of the road. That's one of the things that we can do until we can, you know, realize that, you know, the last time we had significant rain, Western Rutland County didn't have a problem because we actually did what FEMA recommended.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Richards?
First and foremost, we need to admit that we have a problem. And we do. Secondly, I think that actually, if you read some of the publications that are out there now, there's people that are saying electric cars are actually the biggest success story in modern manufacturing in a very long time. It's keeping Detroit alive. One of the things that I've spoken to this already, we don't need to solve national problems all in Vermont, but we can do what we can do. We do little things very nicely. We don't have plastic bags anymore. Very simple. I think we can subsidize better the electric car movement, and we can ignore some of the naysayers who are or say, well, there's not enough electricity. Whatever they say this week. When they started gasoline cars, they didn't have gas stations. We worked that out somehow, and people made money doing it, and there's no problem with that. I have no problem with people making money saving our planet.
Okay, great, thank you. Senator Colomar?
Thank you. So I think we all agree that Vermont is a very small state. And in terms of being able to affect a global solution, we're really not that important, if you will. That doesn't mean we can't make individual decisions. As Bob mentioned, you can certainly choose to buy an electric vehicle if you want. And there are other things. Dana mentioned the weatherization. That's a great idea. We are a clean state overall, and I think sometimes we lose sight of that and feel like maybe we aren't as good as we are. We emit like 0.01% of carbon into the air. It's really not even negligible, if you will. One of the other, Senator Weeks, I think, brought up the clean heat standard. So I've got 5 points on that, and I'll be a firm no. I want to be very clear about that. I am not going to vote for that should I get reelected and we convene in January. And there's a number of reasons. The PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, was appointed by the legislature to do this study. They are unelected and unaccountable. They can do whatever they want. The chair of the committee that sponsored the original bill is now saying, maybe it's not such a good idea. Even the PUC itself has admitted this week that they're not going to fully support what they thought they were going to, and instead it should be just a plain carbon tax. I can't vote for something that I don't understand what it's going to cost Vermonters, so I'm going to be a firm no on it.
Thank you. Ms. Castle?
So the way government works is it oversees and regulates and sometimes imposes fees and fines in order to protect its people. And I think that we have recognized that we are in a crisis and that people don't like to change, and unless they are nudged. And this, we're dancing around the Affordable Clean Heat Act. This is a possibility. A voluntary, affordable, I would not vote for it unless it is affordable. This is a forecast, it's not an implementation draft report, but if it turned out not to be affordable, because I want affordability as much as everybody else, whether it's taxes on education or heat. But as it's set up, it's voluntary, it's affordable, it's gradual, and it's equitable. I have some different information than you do, Senator Collmore, because I understand that Vermont is the second highest greenhouse gas emissions culprit in New England. So we may feel virtuous that we are clean, but in terms of our per capita emissions, it's right up there. The cost of inaction is also high. We are not making this up. This is a mechanism to uphold agreements that we have made internationally. And we are small, but we do have an obligation to be part of the solution. And it also encourages diversity in energy industry, which
Thank
I
you.
think would be good.
Thank you so much. All right, this will be the last question we have time for today. We're going to start with Senator Weeks. We always talk about demographics at these things. What advice might you give a young adult raised in Vermont who's considering leaving the state for more opportunities elsewhere?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It relates back to several of the comments which we made earlier. So we know that currently we have I call it the bathtub, the population bathtub, where at 20 years old, young Vermonters leave the state. At about 45 years old, some of them or others begin to return to the state. So we have this population bathtub from 20 to 45, and it's the economy. There are a small minority of our youngsters which stay in the state, but really the jobs related to a strong economy aren't here. So again, we've been suffering from about 80 years of stagnation. Economic stagnation. I do think that the efforts of Cedar and others are phenomenal. And I do think that, again, we keep focusing on the symptoms and not the problem, and the problem is the economy. We had a forum 2 days ago where I agree with Senator Collmore's observations that we all chose to live here in Vermont because of its beauty and its outdoor vitality. We see it in the attraction to tourism. Folks want to come here. But we really need to put the emphasis on how to create the professional jobs and the environment, which includes education and medical support, to rejuvenate our local economy,
Thank you.
state economy.
Thanks. Senator Williams.
Thanks for the question, Rich. So I believe that the solution is it's family. I'll give you an example. My grandson was going to Castleton University and was on a football scholarship, and COVID hit. And he got so bored with not being able to play football, number one, but also having to do his classes through Zoom, that he decided to go in the Army. And I said, you really should come and talk to me. I spent 35 years in the Army. And, hopefully you take this seriously and you give it all, weigh all your options, because COVID's going to go away. Eventually it did. And, but he signed up and went in the Army. He's now stationed in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I'm talking to him. He says, he doesn't like the climate up there, although he's a Vermonter and he enjoys the climate in Vermont. He was a skier, snowboarder, and an athlete. And I said to him, why don't you consider coming back to Vermont? And, we together we can fix the economy here. And my son said, Dad, he's not coming home. He's out in the world. He needs to, spread his wings and figure out life for himself. I think family will keep people here, but we have to give them something to be here for.
Thank you. Mr. Richards?
2 out of 3 of my boys are back or here in Vermont after military service, one and another cooking all over the world. And now they're back. Third one's going to be in Boston. I think that we have to not only encourage professional jobs, as Senator Weeks said, but factory jobs and blue-collar jobs. There has to be support for people who are not going to be in college and not go to college. So those type of jobs we have to look at those as well. And we have to make it so people don't leave just to get a living wage someplace else. We can do that. We can do this in Vermont. We have regulatory reform in the Act 250 that has helped a little bit and will help more mostly with housing, which is another part of that we've already talked about. And it will that will help us keep people and make it affordable for them to be here. And that we'll start there and work our way up. But thank you.
Thank you. Senator Collmore?
Thanks, Rich. So I think there's 2 groups here that we can talk about. There are our own high school and college graduates who decide to leave for greener pastures, we used to say, and maybe they find them, or maybe they don't, and they come back. In my case, my son is back in Vermont and working at GE. And then we have a bunch of folks, and I agree with Senator Weeks, Cedar does an incredible job with this staycation situation where they invite people in to experience Vermont for a little bit of a mini vacation with the idea that they might eventually relocate here. So I think those efforts are paying off. I keep hearing reports from Cedar that we are getting younger families moving into the area, which is a great idea. And I would love to interview somebody that wants to leave, and I think I could convince him or her that there is not a better place in the country to live than Vermont. So,
Thank you.
So the advice I would give them is to go and see the world. And I think we need to make it, certainly families will draw people back, but I think whether it's our own kids that we're hoping to attract or others, we need to adhere to the development plans that our agencies are putting together for vibrant, compact, smart growth in towns that are already set up with all of the infrastructure. Certainly Rutland could be revived. When I first came here, it was much larger. But separated by the rural natural resources that really are the connective tissue, and supporting the heritage and the culture, and inviting people to come and they can bring their whole selves here and not feel afraid that they won't belong, that they're going to be persecuted or discriminated against or unwelcome. I think that, yeah, we need to build our infrastructure, build good jobs, but we also need to do some work about just being a welcoming community where you're going to feel like you belong and you may turn away from an addiction, or you feel like you're going to belong and you're going to settle here for the rest of your lives and enjoy being with friends, family, and retiring with dignity.
Thank you. And Mr. Peterson?
Thanks, Rich. As others have said, both Senator Collmore and Marsha Castle, there are 2 groups. There's the group that is raised here, and they may or may not have interests in going elsewhere, but they have to have opportunities. It's about opportunity. But as Marsha said, those who come here, and Brian has said it as well, those who come here because they're seeking a particular lifestyle and a particular type of education can be attracted to remain. How do we do that? That question is, I think, a 4-pronged approach. 1, they have to have affordable housing options. 2, we have to attract the investment in additional industry and jobs here. And I'd focus on Rutland County, because I think that that's where our focus should be. And we can develop that. We could become a hub for the state. We could be a model for the state if we do it well. But it's attracting those jobs that are going to pay well. Then that we also have to make sure that hand in hand, the opportunity for housing is concomitant. Those employment opportunities can also be coupled with additional educational opportunities for post-secondary learning, for continuing on. And our academic system is fairly robust, but it can be expanded, and opportunities for lifelong learning could be incorporated, much like the Finns have done. And it's free for everybody. If they want to continue their education, we figure out how to pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to you all. I think our democracy works best when the electorate is well informed, and events like this help make that possible. So I want to thank all of the candidates for being here this evening. I want to offer a big thank you to PEGTV and the staff at Rutland Herald for putting this event on and bringing it to the Rutland community. Thomas Jefferson said, "We do not have government by the majority, we have government by the majority who participate." So we want to urge you all to participate by casting your ballot on or before November 5th and participate. Thank you and good night.